Okay, in part two of the introduction to using titles, we're going to create some different elements, and we're also going to try some keyframes to move and animate our titles. Okay, so a couple of things. From our part one, as you can see, I have actually added a little bit of a shadow. So if we look at how we do that, you highlight the text. I've changed the colour a little bit as well, and then if we go into shadow, you can see I can switch the shadow on or off, and then once you've got your shadow, then you can actually move it around. So you can have quite an elongated shadow, or it can be just off the text. You can also change the angle, so you can have it sort of in front, behind, down, or slightly up. Whatever, that's quite nice, I think. And you can also kind of change the kind of size, but also the blurriness of it, so it's not so sharp. So all a matter of personal taste. You can also change the actual thickness. So this is 0 sort of opacity, and then you can. I mean, that's 100% opacity, and then you can make it much more kind of solid. The shadow will never be completely solid, but you can play around with that. So that's just gives it a little bit more atmosphere. Okay, so what I've also done is I've added a Gatton Point production, a Travis King film. These are all fictional individuals that I've introduced, and I've also got starring. And I've introduced some titles with names on them, so I'm going to have those coming in and move those along like that. Before we look at animating the titles, I just want to show you how you can introduce a different element. I mean, you've got some very basic graphics in Premiere. You could also use a program like Photoshop or Canva or any other graphics program to introduce shapes and silhouettes or whatever. But we're just going to use a basic circle. And in your toolbox down here, you can just click on the basic ellipse tool, and then you can actually draw whatever you want, a sort of oval or a circle. I'm just going to have a couple of circles there, and just get another one, a bit smaller, and position them. Obviously these are bright red now. Let's just click on them to move them. Just going to move them over there. They're not quite the same size, that's deliberate. I'm going to change the colour. With some of the settings on your computer, you might be able to use the eyedropper tool, which is this, to actually get the colour that you want, and actually click on the colour of the lettering. Sometimes that's disabled, but you can always use this code here, these numbers here near the colour are the actual code, so that you can actually put that in if you can't use the eyedropper. But the colour picker will create the colours that you want for your object, and again we can do exactly the same thing and change the colour so that the colours are right. I think that's still too big. If you want them to be exactly the same size, you can look at all the measurements, or you can actually delete one and then just do copy and paste to create a second one, and then they're exactly the same size. If you want to make them slightly kind of, sort of fade in and out, you can. You can also make that as an effect. So, I mean, that's just something else that you can be playing around with. And yeah, I mean, I just wanted to show you so that you've got some other elements to animate there. So what I want to do basically, because this is rather boring, if we just play it, we can see that it's running. It's probably too long. Let's trim it down a little bit. We don't want it to be too long. Title might want to be on the screen for a bit longer, and then just let's move these all up a little bit. I mean, obviously you can spend time getting everything exactly how you want it. Oops. Okay, that's fine. But you can see it's all taking rather a long time. That's still too long, isn't it? Haven't actually played this through in real time. So we can move these along. Yeah, so that's our title. That's possibly not on the screen for quite long enough, so let's make that a little bit longer. And obviously what you can do if you want to is use some kind of transition. So if you go into your effects box, which if you've set up the window as we talked about on effects, your effects will probably be positioned on the right hand side. If you go to video transitions, you can look at various things, and you've got things like slides and wipes, and it's worth sometimes playing around with these because they can give you at least some inspiration. So we could perhaps have a wipe at the beginning and a wipe at the end, and maybe we could have a slide. I mean, I'm just going to put some of these in so that you can kind of see the difference. And then immediately when you play that back, you've got some different kinds of effects going on. That's a bit weird. That hasn't got any effects on it. So that's one way. So do experiment with that. However, you might want to have a bit more control because these can be quite random. You can make your effects, your transitions rather, shorter. You can click on them and then then click on the actual effect and make it shorter or longer. I'm also moving it around so that happens a bit more quickly, a bit more slowly rather, a bit more evenly might be good if they're about the same length. So that's one way you can create a bit of animation, a bit of interest with your titles, but you can also use keyframes. And that's what I'm going to do with the main title. So let's just have a look at, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so we can see that. So with Elderwood, what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to click on that and I'm going to go up to my effect controls. And what I want to actually look at in video is open up my motion controls and look at position. So I'm not necessarily going to start with the title off screen. I mean, you might want to do that, but you might want to start with the title perhaps very, very small. So you can play around with position and you can also play around with scale. So if you notice, if I take the slider all the way to 0, there's nothing there at all. So if I actually click on the little kind of stopwatch to actually turn on the keyframes, and I'll do it on position as well, so we've got the same starting point. That will be my first keyframe, and you'll notice here in this little box, they're quite small, you've actually inserted a keyframe. If we then play it and stop it a little bit further along, what we can do is set a second keyframe where it's the size we want it on the screen. So where was it? Sort of something like that. You don't want it to fill the screen necessarily, although some titles sometimes are very large. We can then insert with scale another keyframe. If we wanted to also move, sorry, I didn't do that quite right. Yeah, that's what I want to do there. So that's my next keyframe, and then when I actually play it, it will hold at that size. I could even do what some titles do, which is have the title moving and actually have other elements sort of appearing over it. So if I actually move these onto different tracks, let's see what we can do. Actually have this going through the whole thing. So we can actually have. Let's just move these out of the way for the moment. Let's have starring Jack Ryder. Doesn't quite now when we're seeing them on the screen together. It looked okay before, but the colour looks a bit off, so you might want to actually change that if you're doing it. But what I wanted to show you is that with the effect, you can actually have the title and the names. You maybe don't actually need to have starring, because everybody actually knows that is going to be what your cast members are doing, but maybe we could just have that a little bit smaller. So if we go to our essential graphics again, we can just make that really, really small. And let's see if we can actually change the colour of it again. So let's make it the same as our text. That looks a lot better. It's not that far off white, but I think it was just, didn't look quite right. So what we can do is actually on our title, we can actually have the title becoming even bigger on the screen, but it can be moving very, very slowly. So we can actually have another keyframe here where we're actually inserting the scale, and it's becoming even larger on the screen. That doesn't look exactly centered up. So I'll go back and check that in a moment, because it looks to me as if it's a little bit off center, but we'll come back to that. So we can have that moving as our other titles are appearing on the screen, sort of above and below the title. So we can have, with the title, you could also put in, with the cast member names, you could also animate those, and you could have those perhaps sliding in from the side, but instead of using a transition, you're actually using a keyframe. So again, you can go to position, and your larger number, the first number, is your horizontal number, so we could actually have the first keyframe. Let's just switch them on. The first keyframe is actually that the cast member name is off screen, and then we can add in another keyframe. So it starts off with Jack Ryder off screen, and then by about here, we've actually moved it into the center of the screen. The nice thing about keyframes is that you can put in a couple. Let's just see what I've done. I think perhaps I hadn't actually put one at the beginning. Let me just take that out again. Yeah, let's play that and see what works there. That's a bit quick, isn't it? But getting the timings right for all of that. The starring didn't seem to be on the screen for quite long enough. I'll have a tiny bit longer. And the Jack Ryder seemed a bit fast, but let's have a look at the whole thing. Yeah, it's a bit slow, starring. Yeah. But you get the picture. Let's move them all a little further. All of this is really, really fiddly. What you can also do with keyframes is, you could make that title slightly become, more translucent, transparent. So you could also, rather than, as well as using the motion, you could also be changing the opacity. So as it becomes larger, it also becomes slightly more opaque. So you could start by inserting a keyframe when it's 100%, and then you could take it a bit further. Take it here. Oh, hang on. Sorry. Now, I've made a classic mistake here. Spot the deliberate error. I've actually got the name Jack Ryder of the actor highlight, and I'm not actually changing that. So I'm just going to undo what I just did, because I don't want to change the opacity of that, and click on Elderwood, and so when the starring starts to appear, then I can insert a keyframe there, and then I can start to make it fade slightly, and you could have it fading completely away. As it gets bigger, it could actually be getting bigger as well. So you could take it back, and you can use these go to previous keyframes to actually set all your changes in the same place, and you can be getting it to become bigger. So you add in a keyframe here, so you're actually changing the scale, and you're making it bigger on the screen. So the whole thing now, well, that's much too quick. It's the timing isn't quite right, and then it gets smaller at the end because I haven't actually changed that keyframe. But you get the general idea. I think all of this takes a lot of time because you've actually got to be paying attention to what you're doing. But I think you can see that quite quickly, you've made something a lot more interesting by actually animating your titles.